my wedding. Now. I'm begging you.
It was the moment that shattered a dream. The chapel was bathed in warm late afternoon light, petals drifting from the priest's hand, and all of Linda's years of waiting seemed to stand still. At the front of the aisle, her daughter Jessica, her only child, stood in white, smiling, radiant. Guests rose, a soft murmur of congratulations. Then Jessica turned, her eyes fixed on the back of the room where someone had stood quietly. Linda. The air changed. Jessica's voice caught as she said it. "Please remove her." Linda's knees threatened to buckle, the scent of lilies filling the hushed space. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Her mother of 27 years. Jessica's words echoed, "She doesn't belong here." In a single heartbeat, the day made for joy became a stage for confrontation. What led to this moment, and what would happen next? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. When that video first appeared online, no one could make sense of it. Viewers replayed the 30-second clip again and again, a bride ordering security to remove her own mother from the wedding she had spent months planning. Some said Jessica was heartless. Others swore Linda must have done something unforgivable. But the truth, as it would turn out, was far more complicated than anyone could imagine. Beneath the smiles, beneath the white dress and the polished ceremony, there were years of silence, a wound that had never healed. What could make a daughter cut her mother out of the most important day of her life? Why did Linda show up uninvited after so long apart? And what happened after those church doors closed? For days, the internet speculated, yet only 2 women truly knew the story. And for the first time, we're about to uncover what really happened between them. As headlines spread across social media, the world demanded answers. Bride humiliates mother in front of guests. Family feud explodes at wedding. Every platform had its opinion, but very few stopped to ask the deeper questions. Was this cruelty or pain disguised as anger? Could forgiveness ever survive after public rejection? To understand that day, we have to go back years, before Jessica wore the dress, before Linda stood trembling at the door, to a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, where a single mother once worked 2 jobs, and a young girl learned what loneliness felt like. That's where the story truly begins, and it's where the first cracks in their bond appeared, long before the wedding bells ever rang. Linda was 23 when she found out she was pregnant. She remembered the exact day, a rainy Thursday, the sound of a bus engine fading outside her apartment window, and a tiny plastic stick resting on the bathroom counter. She sat on the edge of the tub for almost an hour, staring, unsure whether to cry or laugh. The man she loved, Michael, had already left town for a construction job in another state. Promises had been made, but promises don't always pay rent. Linda took the night shift at a diner and spent mornings cleaning offices. There were weeks she lived on coffee and leftover pie, saving every dollar for the child she hadn't met yet. When Jessica was born, Linda felt both overwhelmed and determined. She swore that no matter how hard life became, her daughter would never feel unloved. But love alone, she would learn, wasn't always enough to keep things from breaking. Their apartment was small, 2 rooms stacked above a laundromat that never slept. Jessica grew up with the steady hum of washing machines as her lullaby. Linda's hands often smelled of detergent, her nails rough from bleach, yet every night she sat beside Jessica's bed, humming the same tune her own mother used to sing before she was disowned for getting pregnant young. They didn't have much, hand-me-down clothes, dinners made of pasta and hope, but Jessica always smiled. She'd draw pictures of castles on the backs of diner receipts, telling her mother that one day she'd have a big house, so Linda would never have to scrub floors again. Linda would kiss her forehead and whisper, "I don't need a castle, baby. I just need you." But as Jessica got older, innocence slowly gave way to questions. Why didn't she have a dad at school events? Why did other kids get new backpacks while hers came from thrift shops? Linda tried to protect her from the truth that Michael had never called again. that some nights she cried herself to sleep out of guilt for bringing a child into struggle. Jessica began to resent the smallness of their world. By 14, she wanted space, independence, answers. Arguments turned sharp, words that couldn't be taken back. Linda, exhausted from double shifts, often met anger with silence, believing time would heal it. Instead, silence became the language between them. When Jessica earned a scholarship to a university in Seattle, Linda couldn't stop her tears. She watched her daughter pack everything she owned into 2 suitcases, promising to call every week. The calls came less and less. Texts went unanswered. Linda told herself it was normal, college kids get busy, but the distance wasn't only miles. By senior year, Jessica rarely mentioned her mother. When she met Ryan, a young architect with ambition and charm, she found the kind of stability she'd always dreamed of. He adored her, admired her resilience, and soon proposed. It should have been the start of happiness, but Jessica's heart carried an unresolved weight, the belief that her mother had failed her, that poverty was proof of neglect rather than sacrifice. And when Linda heard about the engagement through a neighbor, she realized her daughter hadn't just moved away. She'd shut the door completely. 6 months before the wedding, Linda wrote a letter. It was short, trembling handwriting on yellow stationery. "I'm proud of you, Jess. I'd love to see you walk down that aisle, but if my presence would cause you pain, I'll stay home. Just know I'll be watching from afar, praying for you." The letter was never answered. On the morning of the ceremony, Linda sat on her couch, staring at a framed photo of Jessica as a child holding a paper crown. Something inside her whispered that maybe this time she should try one more time to make things right. She ironed the same yellow dress she'd worn to Jessica's high school graduation, the last event they'd shared in peace, and left the apartment quietly. That decision would change both their lives forever. The morning sun crept through the blinds as Linda stood at her small mirror, pinning her hair into a bun the way she used to before double shifts. Her hands trembled. It had been nearly 3 years since she had last seen Jessica in person. She'd replayed that final conversation hundreds of times. Jessica saying she needed space, Linda trying to answer through tears that never seemed to end. But today wasn't about the past, she told herself. Today was about witnessing her daughter's new beginning, even if she was only a quiet shadow in the back row. The yellow dress fit tighter than she remembered, the fabric thin from age. She pressed it flat, took a deep breath, and slipped Jessica's old locket into her pocket. Inside was a faded picture of the two of them at a carnival, ice cream smiles, matching face paint. It was a reminder of who they once were, before pride and distance built walls between them. The chapel sat on a hill outside the city, a place Linda had never been invited to but found easily from the newspaper notice. Cars lined the parking lot, guests in suits and pastel dresses bustling with laughter. She hesitated at the door, the sound of organ music spilling out like a memory from another life. No one recognized her. She found a seat in the back corner, half hidden by the stone pillar. For a moment, she just watched. Jessica at the altar, glowing, confident, surrounded by people who seemed to adore her. Linda smiled, a tear blurring her vision. She made it, she thought. She really made it. But as she sat there, a guest whispered something to Jessica's maid of honor, who turned, eyes narrowing toward the back. Linda pretended to fix her bag, pretending not to notice, but whispers spread quickly, the kind that sting even when you can't hear the words. Jessica turned her head slightly, mid-ceremony, and her gaze froze. The room seemed to fall silent even before the priest stopped speaking. Their eyes met for the first time in years. It should have been a moment of healing, but instead, the air thickened with disbelief. Jessica's face shifted, first surprise, then confusion, and finally something colder. The crowd waited, unaware of what unspoken history stood between them. The priest tried to continue, his voice cracking slightly. But Jessica's attention was locked on her mother. She whispered something to Ryan, her fiancé, whose brow furrowed, unsure what was happening. And then Jessica said it. Not a whisper this time, but a clear command that carried through every corner of the church. "Security, please remove her." Gasps echoed. Linda froze, her heart sinking as if the floor had disappeared. An usher approached gently, unsure whether to move forward. "Ma'am," he whispered, "maybe it's best if we step outside." Linda's eyes filled, but she nodded silently. She didn't argue, didn't speak. Her purse slipped from her shoulder, spilling a small envelope onto the pew. Inside, a card that read, "Congratulations, my beautiful girl." As she bent to pick it up, Jessica turned away, refusing to look again. Outside, the air was sharp with wind. Linda stood on the church steps, hearing the muffled sound of vows being spoken inside. She wanted to walk away, but her knees refused to move. A few guests glanced through the glass doors, some with pity, others with confusion. One woman murmured, "That poor lady," before turning back inside. Linda sat on the edge of the stone wall, holding the card close to her chest. She didn't cry loudly. It was the quiet kind of heartbreak, the kind that feels too familiar to make a sound. In her pocket, she felt the locket still warm from her palm. She whispered softly, "I'm sorry, baby. I never stopped loving you." Later, the clip would spread across the internet. A shaky cell phone video captured by a guest, posted with the caption, "Bride kicks her own mother out of wedding." Within hours, it gathered millions of views, comment sections filled with judgment, anger, and speculation. Strangers debated whether Jessica was cruel or justified. But behind every frame of that viral video was something no one saw. The years of misunderstanding, the silence that had hardened into pride, and a love that had never really died. If you've been watching until now, drop "I'm still here" in the comments, because what happens next is where everything begins to change. In the days that followed, the internet had already made up its mind. Hashtags appeared on TikTok and Twitter overnight. The wedding fallout, ye mother of the bride, family drama gone wrong. Comment sections turned into battlefields. Some called Jessica heartless, others called Linda manipulative. But the truth was, neither label fit. Real life is rarely that simple. Behind those screens were two women, both broken in different ways, each convinced they were the one who'd been betrayed. Linda stayed off social media, though the few people from her old neighborhood made sure to tell her what was happening. One message read, "Linda, are you okay? They're talking about you everywhere." She didn't answer. Instead, she kept to her small apartment, where silence stretched long enough to feel like punishment. She replayed that day in her head again and again. Jessica's face, that flash of anger, the way her voice didn't tremble when she asked her to leave. She couldn't stop wondering, had she really hurt her daughter that deeply? Meanwhile, Jessica's perfect wedding photos were tainted by something she couldn't control. Every time she scrolled through her feed, there it was. Her mother's image, frozen mid-exit, eyes wet, shoulders hunched. The internet called her the bride with no heart. The more Jessica tried to explain, the worse it got. Interviews were requested, podcasts reached out. Gossip channels speculated endlessly about what could have caused such a rift. But Jessica refused to speak publicly. To her, that silence was control. But to the world, it was guilt. Reporters began digging. They found fragments of old posts. A picture of Jessica in her teenage years with a caption, "For Mom, who taught me to fight for myself." That post resurfaced and went viral again, this time framed as tragic irony. Strangers speculated that maybe Linda had been abusive, or perhaps Jessica had grown entitled. None of them were right. The truth was much quieter. Years earlier, when Linda lost her husband, she'd taken on extra jobs to pay Jessica's college tuition. Jessica, too young to understand the cost, saw only distance. She thought her mother had stopped caring. In reality, Linda had been breaking herself to keep her daughter's dream alive. That misunderstanding was the crack that split everything apart. It grew with time, with pride, with words left unsaid. By the time Jessica realized what her mother had done, it was already too late. The wedding video had become a cultural spectacle. Days turned into weeks. Reporters showed up at Linda's door. She refused everyone. "Please," she'd whisper through the door, "just let it die down." But the internet doesn't let go easily. Someone even created a GoFundMe for the mother who was humiliated by her own daughter. It raised over $20,000 in 2 days. Linda sent the money back, writing simply, "I don't want your pity, I just want peace." But peace was far away for both of them. Jessica, now a newlywed, began losing brand sponsorships from her small fashion business. Her followers dropped. Comments filled every post. "Call your mum. You'll regret this." At first she ignored them, convincing herself that she'd done the right thing, that she was protecting her new family from old wounds. But at night, when the house was quiet, her mind drifted back to the woman in the yellow dress, standing alone outside that church. 6 weeks later, a journalist named Mariah Hensley decided to find the truth. Unlike others, she didn't chase clicks. She knocked on Linda's door not with a camera crew, but with empathy. "I just want to understand," she said softly. For the first time in years, Linda opened up, not for attention but for release. She told her story slowly, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater, her eyes tired but calm. She spoke about the years of work, the tuition bills, the nights she spent in hospital waiting rooms when Jessica was sick, the small sacrifices that no one had ever known about. Mariah's article went live 2 days later, titled, "The Story You Weren't Told About the Bride and Her Mother." It didn't sensationalize, it humanized. Within hours it trended again, but this time the tone was different. Comments poured in, people admitting they had judged too quickly, people sharing their own family struggles. Some wrote, "This made me call my mom tonight." Others said, "This story broke me. I hope they find peace." Jessica read the article late one night while sitting beside her husband, Ryan. As she scrolled through each paragraph, her breath grew shallow. It wasn't just guilt, it was recognition. Every forgotten sacrifice, every misunderstood silence came flooding back. She whispered, "I didn't know." Her husband squeezed her hand, saying nothing. That night, Jessica didn't sleep. She watched the sunrise through the window, tears wetting her pillow, realizing that the world now saw her mother differently. And maybe for the first time, so did she. It had been nearly 3 months since the wedding when Jessica finally picked up the phone. Her hands shook as she stared at the number she hadn't dialed in years. She rehearsed what to say, but every version felt wrong. "I'm sorry" seemed too small. "I didn't know" sounded hollow. So she did what she had always done. She hesitated. It wasn't until her husband gently said, "If you don't do it now, you might never get the chance," that she pressed call. The line rang 4 times before a quiet voice answered. "Hello?" It was her mother. No anger, no bitterness, just weariness. Jessica froze, then whispered, "Mom, it's me." The silence that followed stretched like an eternity. You could almost hear the weight of the years between them, the birthdays missed, the words never spoken, the pain buried under pride. Finally, Linda exhaled, her voice trembling slightly. "Jessica, are you okay?" The question was simple, but it broke Jessica completely. She began to cry, not polite tears, but the kind that come from guilt and grief mixed together. She tried to speak, but could only manage, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Linda didn't respond right away. Then softly, almost like she was talking to the wind, she said, "I know." They met a week later, in a small cafe near the outskirts of town. Linda arrived first, nervous, holding a small envelope in her hand. Jessica came in quietly, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, hoping no one would recognize her. When their eyes met, time stopped. Neither knew whether to smile or cry, so they did both. They talked for hours, about the wedding, about the years apart, about how one misunderstanding can grow into a mountain when no one's brave enough to climb it. Jessica admitted she'd always thought her mother didn't want to be part of her life. Linda revealed she'd worked 3 jobs just to keep her in school. Both women sat in silence for a long time after that, realizing how much had been lost because neither could see the other's pain. That meeting didn't erase everything. Pain doesn't vanish just because truth arrives, but it began to soften the edges. Jessica took her mother's hand and said, "I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't realize I was breaking both of us." Linda smiled faintly, replying, Sometimes love hurts because we give it the wrong shape. But it's still love. The story didn't stay quiet for long. When someone from the cafe recognized Jessica, a photo of the reunion spread online within hours. But this time, the internet wasn't cruel. The caption read, "The bride who kicked her mother out, now finding her way back." The same people who once criticized her now shared words of encouragement, stories of forgiveness, and messages of hope. It was strange how the same world that tore them apart was now helping them heal. A week later, Jessica posted something unexpected. It was a photo of her and her mother sitting side by side, smiling gently. The caption was simple. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what matters most." That post reached millions, but for Jessica, the only person she cared about seeing it was her mother. Still, one truth remained. Forgiveness is not a one-time event. It's a choice that has to be made again and again, especially when memories resurface. For months they spoke every day. Some calls ended in laughter, some in tears, but they were talking, and that alone was enough. Linda once said something Jessica would never forget. "People will remember the wedding for a moment, Jess, but I'll remember this, that you came back." That conversation marked a shift in both their lives. Linda began volunteering at a local shelter, saying she wanted to help others who had lost touch with their families. Jessica started a small podcast titled "Bridges We Burn, Bridges We Build," dedicated to stories of reconciliation and second chances. The first episode wasn't about anyone else. It was about her and her mother. She ended it with a line that resonated across millions of listeners. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It gives it meaning." It was almost a year to the day since the wedding when Jessica received the call that her mother had fallen ill. Nothing too serious, the doctors said, but enough to require rest and monitoring. Jessica drove 5 hours to her mother's town, her heart pounding the entire way. Every mile brought memories, the church steps, the arguments, the laughter they'd rediscovered since reconnecting. When she finally saw her mother lying in the hospital bed, pale but smiling, Jessica broke down beside her. "You scared me," she whispered. Linda chuckled weakly and said, "Well, at least now you'll visit more often." They both laughed through tears, a sound that filled the sterile room with warmth. For the first time in years, the air between them held no tension, only love. During Linda's recovery, Jessica stayed by her side. She brought soup, read books aloud, even showed her how to use a tablet so she could watch videos. One afternoon, Linda looked at her daughter and said, "You know, if I could go back, I'd do a lot of things differently, but pushing you to be strong, that I don't regret." Jessica nodded, her eyes soft. "And if I could go back," she replied, "I'd have brought you to the wedding, no matter who didn't like it." They both smiled, finally understanding that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning how to carry it without letting it weigh you down. Months later, when Linda had fully recovered, Jessica surprised her with something she never expected, a small, intimate ceremony. It wasn't a wedding this time, but a vow renewal. She and her husband stood before their closest family and friends, with one goal: to rewrite the moment that once tore them apart. Linda walked her daughter down the aisle this time, arm in arm, tears streaming down her cheeks. The same yellow dress she wore at the first wedding hung now in a frame at the entrance, symbolizing both pain and peace. As they reached the altar, Jessica turned to her mother and whispered, "You should have been here the first time, but I'm glad you're here now." When the ceremony ended, someone asked Jessica if she planned to post about it. She smiled and said, "No, not everything needs an audience." But a few days later, she shared one photo, her and her mother holding hands, walking away from the camera. The caption read, "She gave me life twice, once when I was born and once when she forgave me." It became one of the most shared images online, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. People connected to it, to the quiet power of reconciliation, to the idea that love, even when fractured, can still be mended if both sides are willing to try. In an interview months later, Jessica reflected, If there's one thing I learned, it's that pride can feel like strength, but it's really just fear wearing a disguise. I thought cutting my mother out would heal me, but it only hollowed me out. It took losing her to realize she was the reason I stood so tall in the first place. And as for Linda, when asked if she ever regretted showing up that day uninvited, she smiled faintly and said, "No mother should have to stand outside her child's wedding. But maybe I was meant to, because standing out there taught me that sometimes love waits patiently, even in pain, and when it's ready, it finds its way back." Their story became less about conflict and more about healing. Online, it inspired thousands to call their parents, reconcile old wounds, and forgive themselves for the years lost to silence. And that's how a story that began with heartbreak ended in something stronger than forgiveness, understanding. Because sometimes, what shocks everyone isn't the pain we endure, but the grace we're still capable of showing after it. And maybe that's the lesson hidden inside this story, that love doesn't always come wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it arrives late, bruised and quiet, asking only for another chance. Jessica and Linda's journey wasn't one of heroes and villains. It was a story of two people who both made mistakes and both found the courage to say, "Let's start again." As their lives moved forward, they didn't erase what happened. They honored it. They talked about it openly, using it to help others who had drifted apart from family. Their podcast grew into a community, a safe space where people shared stories of regret, forgiveness, and rebuilding trust. And for every listener who said, "I called my mum today," a small piece of their pain found healing too. But the truth is, not everyone gets that second chance. Some of us hold on to anger so tightly we forget what it feels like to be free of it. So as you sit here listening to this story, ask yourself, is there someone you've drifted from? Someone you still love but can't bring yourself to call? If so, maybe today is the day to reach out. Not because the past can be changed, but because peace is still possible. And to everyone watching right now, what do you think about Jessica's choice? If you were in her shoes, would you have done the same? Or if you were Linda, would you have walked away or shown up anyway? Tell us what you feel in the comments. We truly read every single one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, because sometimes stories like this remind us that it's never too late to mend what's been broken. And if you found meaning in this, make sure you're subscribed, because the next story we're telling might just change the way you see love, forgiveness, and what it really means to come home.